Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to discuss the offense from the Commanders game that finally broke the Ravens' long winning streak. Apparently, it's important nationally now. If you didn't listen to that broadcast, it's the greatest preseason game ever. Now that the Ravens lost it anyway, but here to join me and talk about the offense is Voss Laricos. Voss, how you doing?
Doing great, Ken. Doing great. Really looking forward to the way the roster's coming together, taking shape. Pretty excited about the additions that Eric DeCosta made last week.
Yeah, it's definitely addressed some significant needs. I think we're going to talk about a couple of the offensive position groups here in terms of how things are progressing and where they might end. We won't hit on all that until the last game. We'll do some roster analysis at that point. But let's talk about this streak first, because all we have heard for a long period of time from any other source outside of Baltimore is the streak doesn't matter, or they downplay the streak in terms of the importance, or they criticize Harbaugh occasionally for playing to win instead of playing to develop and using the other thing that preseason is for, avoiding injuries, et cetera, et cetera. It's very interesting last night that the Ravens sat out 35 people in this game. You see how many players the Commanders sat out?
About 15 or so, right?
12. Yeah, very good. So there was a very big change in terms of who wants it. I thought it was very interesting that Joe Buck talked about getting that text from Papa, the Giants announcers, about how interested he was in this game. And all of a sudden,
I think this time of year, anything that has any type of meaning to it, the national media will try to make a storyline out of it, because there isn't a lot to take away from the preseason, wins and losses, and trying to make it a dramatic game. As far as the streak, I think I'm personally a little bit happy to see it go, because I just thought that the storylines around it were kind of overshadowing, what we're really trying to accomplish in these preseason games.
Okay, so but are you truly saying that it's the storylines are overshadowing and you'd rather hear news about what the Ravens are trying to do, or are you saying the Ravens are allowing the streak to affect how they're game managing in some way that is negative?
I don't think too much of that. I can't think back on, 24 games, really any instances, that Harbaugh was doing something that was out of the ordinary to preserve the streak. It was a nice thing to have. You certainly like to win the games. I think there is that value, as he kept mentioning, of some of the players that maybe never made it to the league or made their mark in the league, but they contributed to a historic streak. So that's a cool part about it. Just kind of tired of hearing about it, tired of talking about it as if it was something more than it really was.
Okay. Well, that's fair enough. I thought one of the things that was nice about it was talking about the Ravens' continual outstanding drafting and defensive depth they brought to the table, and that was certainly a big part of this streak. And something actually that's missing from this team is the defensive depth to sustain such a streak. And I thought at least that was an interesting thing to keep talking about it. And if I'm really searching for things that the Ravens did differently, the only concessions I can come up with in the last couple of years to try to extend the streak were the play of Geno Stone and Darryl Worley being kind of out of place for the typical second half players that you'd have on the field in each of the P1 games the last 2 years. But that's really grasping for a pretty far straw.
Right. We're not talking about, first round picks, starting players that are out there. You're talking about backups. Maybe your backups are a little more experienced than normal, but that's how the Ravens just generally operate. I do think this may be a stretch, but I do think there is some correlation between Daniel Jeremiah had a saying, I believe it was last year. He said, depth wins in the regular season, stars win in the playoffs. And I think if you take that maybe another step back, depth really, really wins in the preseason. So the team isn't quite built that way. They're a little bit more top heavy this year than they have been. So maybe that some impacts, the preseason, not being as prepared for but maybe they're more prepared for the postseason potentially.
Yeah, if I didn't really know where the Ravens' weaknesses were, I'd say they probably are. But they're weak at cornerback, and that's a position where being strong in the preseason and being deep there is a good place. Being deep on the defensive line, and that's been a good thing has been good during the preseason. But I'm really concerned about the depth at cornerback at this point and how they're going to unravel that. This isn't the offensive show. Sorry, this is the offensive show. It's not the defensive show. So we want to focus on the offensive side of the ball. Let's move on for a second, talk about the backup quarterback battle that's going on. And I just used air quotes if you couldn't tell from just listening to the pod there. Josh Johnson, a great night in game 2, not so great in week 1 in terms of his play. Do you think there is a true question between Johnson and Huntley at this point, or even the possibility that they would keep both?
I don't think they're going to have room to keep both. There's no, unless you go to 8 offensive linemen somehow, which I don't think is a good idea. I don't see both. I do think there's a small crack in the door that Johnson could maybe take over for Huntley. He's dealing with that hamstring injury. I think it's probably going to come down to Todd Monken's preference, and that has been kind of the rumor that Monken likes the veteran stability and the experience potentially of Johnson versus Huntley. Huntley may not fit the offense, Monken's offense, as well as he fit Roman's, particularly with the arm strength aspect of it. I do think Huntley's the front runner, but it wouldn't be shocking.
Okay. All right. Was certainly an interesting week 2 from Johnson. He did have an interception. It's really the only deviation from pretty much a perfect day for him throwing the football. But that was pretty much all on Prochet from my point of view. Yeah. Went right through his hands. And
then he kept it in bounds.
Yeah.
If he could have knocked it out of bounds even. But yeah.
Did it look like to you? And I never really saw the angle that showed this directly. That it went through his hands and then off his right thigh and bounced back to the defender at that point.
It's just sort of. I mean, it was almost like he was trying to do a trick catch and he left it up in the air for the corner to pick it off. I mean, it probably a little bit slightly underthrown, but he should have made a better play for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was a little bit underthrown. And it's an interesting point you make about Huntley not really fitting the offense directly, because it's not an obvious conclusion that would be true. But it does kind of make sense that Johnson will have a little more arm strength. But if you really thought Huntley didn't fix the offense, it's almost like you'd go out and get somebody else. I mean, Jacoby Brissett, who the Browns brought in the second half, might be a better guy for a Monken offense, for example. And I'm not saying that he's available or anything. He might not have been in terms of what the Browns would have done. But I'll tell you this, I thought it was very surprising that the Browns were not able to move the ball on the Ravens effectively threes with Brissett in the game.
I'd agree. I think Brissett is one of the top backups in the league. I think Huntley has that reputation. I'm not sure his play is necessarily warranted that. I believe there were rumors that DaCosta was kicking the tires on, I think it was it Baker Mayfield before he went down to Tampa. I do think it's reasonable to say we're running a somewhat different offense now, and we're looking for maybe a little bit different skill set. So, Lamar Jackson is, the better version of Huntley. Maybe Huntley doesn't have the arm strength that Lamar does. So maybe that could be something. Ultimately, as far as future value, there isn't a whole lot on either of them. Perhaps Huntley just could net a comp pick if things went a certain way this season. I don't think you really have any future value out of Johnson.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the comp pick is one thing that I really hadn't included in the calculations here. There's a $1.5 million savings for cutting Huntley and going Johnson. Exactly, it's $2.67 million to $1.17 million. So you have that savings. The tenure, other than the fact that he's coming up on a potential comp pick situation, is not a consideration at all as far as I'm concerned, because there's no future value from either player. They're all market years you have to pay for in the future. So the fact that it's 37 and 27, I think you look at it and you just say, well, who's going to be better this next year? Because that's really all that matters. But the comp pick is another consideration that I really should have thought about originally. And with a quarterback, you could get an overpayment there by somebody if he comes in and wins a couple ball games.
Yeah, it's potential. I wouldn't just make that lead the decision. I think you want to have your best option available. If Lamar is out for a couple games in the middle of the year, that's really what you're looking for with this position to fill.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll continue to watch on the quarterback battle. How are you expecting the team to play at quarterback in the third week?
I think we probably see all three of the backup options. I think they probably want to, unless Huntley's hamstring is still nagging him. But I think it is a new scheme, and I think you'd like to see how they fit into it.
Okay. Do you need to see more of Brown at this point? I mean, the reason you see Brown is because you don't really want to risk the other two, to me, because I don't think Brown necessarily has a place on the team at this point.
Well, and that's actually, now that we're talking through it, maybe you don't showcase Brown to try to give him a better shot of sticking on your practice squad.
Mm-hmm. The other consideration that we mentioned earlier was, do they keep three quarterbacks? You said don't really see room. There is a incentive to do so this year by having a third quarterback on the 53-man roster. You can have him as an emergency activation on game day, and you can bring in, if your top two quarterbacks go down. That's such a disaster scenario. Nobody ever wants to think about it, and maybe it's not worth considering other than in a playoff game, say.
Yeah, that's a great point. So my understanding is this cannot be a practice squad activation.
That is correct.
It has to be he has to be on the 53.
That is correct.
So at that point, I think I don't know. I think the other player that you could keep on your 53 is probably more valuable than having that option.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with that as well. Let's talk about what we learned from the deployment order today, because there's some on offense in particular, and there's always some good things you learn from deployment order. As I search frantically for my deployment order sheet. All right, this may have gotten away from me temporarily, but I will find it. Start in terms of the. I always like to start with the offensive line, but we can start anywhere you like in terms of the order that we saw players on the field.
Sure, let's go to the O-line. We saw the unit that they've been using primarily. Mustafa played well into the fourth quarter as the center. Cleveland played the entire game between right guard and right tackle. He did not log a snap at left guard, correct?
That's correct. All right guard 2 series, left guard 2. Right tackle 2 series, back to 1 right guard, and then all the rest at right tackle.
And Salah was well behind Simpson. That's probably the biggest note. Any other offensive line?
Well, obviously none of the starters or McCary played. We got to toss that out there first. I guess the other interesting things at left tackle, where we saw Sharp for 2 series at the beginning of the game and then a series at the beginning of the second half. And I had some questions about that originally, and I'm thinking maybe that related to playing with each of the 2 quarterbacks a little bit. But also I think they have Sharp. It leads me to believe that Sharp is the third emergency option, meaning I guess it's the second emergency option, because McCary will be the first guy who is up at left tackle, and then Sharp might be second, and not Faalele. Now, we've seen a fair amount of Faalele at left tackle, but he's always played behind Sharp in terms of the order of entry. And just there's something that is telling me here that even though they hope to stash Sharp on the practice squad, because there really isn't room for him on the 53, that they would go to him if anything happened, and McCary, both Stanley and McCary, weren't available.
That's an interesting point. Then I think that's a fair conclusion from this deployment order. I hadn't necessarily thought of that, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and Faalele looked pretty good in the first game. Honestly, I saw a return to some of the bad habits in the second game. We get into that a little bit in the second thing. But one thing it's a bugaboo with me is Faalele is he's an enormous man, and he likes to mirror without contact, which means he gives ground to try and mirror rather than strike at the opponent, and mirror through contact. And it drives me up the wall for a guy his size not to use it, not to have that good independent hand usage, not to be playing pinball with both flippers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my notes were mixed on Fale and Cleveland for that matter. I thought,
Mhm.
I mean, you'd have some good block there or good anchor there, and then the next play, the reversal, a positive note, then a negative note, back and forth, back and forth. Both of them, I thought this game.
Yeah, nobody was perfect on the offensive line except for one guy in this game. Actually, Mustafa had a very good game too. I've got it, but there's one other player we'll get to in a little bit who looked terrific. Okay. So we know who sat out on the offensive line. How about the deployment order at other positions? And let's just do a little look around the world.
So we saw, correct me if I'm wrong, Tariq Black before Demas. So
Same
I
drive.
thought that same drive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then, so I think those are probably your two front runners for the practice squad receiver. At least that's what I took away from this. And then the third string offensive lineman did not get too much run at all. They were inserted well into the fourth quarter, which was another note. Tight ends were as expected, I thought, and running backs as well. You know, Melvin Gordon is not necessarily pushing Justice Hill for his job.
I don't believe that's true. I think the issue is Keaton Mitchell, and I want to talk about the running backs in kind of their own segment. We can do that right now if you want, and then come back to the deployment order. But the running back situation is a very difficult one, and there's no doubt in terms of how he's paid and how he's played. There's no way they're cutting Justice Hill. He's a good player. He helps them on special teams, and he is right now providing that burst to the outside we all hope to see earlier in his career, that we saw more power than we expected, but less burst, I would say, than we expected.
Yeah, he had a really nice game. I've been a Justice Hill, I guess you call me a Justice Hill truther for a few years now. Had a nice inside run, tough run on the inside. Then he had that swing pass where he got the first down, and then he had that big gainer off the corner all in the first drive. He was kind of the man making the engine hum on that first drive, and I think there's a world, Ken, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think there's a world where if he never got hurt in 2021 when Gus and Dobbins were both out, he would have been up close to the league lead in rushing yards that season.
Yeah, that's not impossible to believe. I mean, he's a smaller guy, so that's not typically the way that's done. But hey, it's Roman's offense, so yeah, it's possible. And certainly the guys they had in there weren't getting it done. The tendency would have been to lean on Hill for more and more in a year like that. So, yeah, I could see that for sure. Gordon, we talked about a little bit. You talked about a little bit primarily earlier, not really pushing Hill for playing time. But the guy who certainly is electric every time he comes on the field is Keaton Mitchell. And I don't know. I think he is scarfed he's one of the few guys that I think will be certainly scarfed on cut down day or the day after on waiver day if they cut him. The Mizell and who's the other guy? The Mostert.
Bobby Rainey.
Well, I'm thinking Mostert actually was the other guy. Yeah, Mostert, so we're talking about speed guys who get taken as soon as you cut them, and the league still craves speed all over, and we'll do that. But Bobby Rainey would be another example of a player who had something of a career elsewhere as well. But Keaton Mitchell, I mean, how do you see him in terms of his situation on cutdown day?
I think he's going to make the team, and I think he should make the team. And I think looking forward ahead to next year, Justice Hill, Keaton Mitchell, and potentially a mid-round draft pick with a little bit of more of in the Gus Edwards mold. I think that's be a nice core of running backs. You're going to have to find places to save cap space in the future, and there's no better position on the roster to do so than running back. But I think Mitchell, I'm a little. Obviously, he had that huge gainer on that draw play, and he also had a nice kickoff return. It looked like he misplayed a punt, which I don't know. He looked like he was going to catch it, and then he let it bounce at the last minute, which was a little bit concerning. But
that was him and not Prochet, right?
I thought it was Mitchell.
Okay, you could be right.
I think there was two. This was the one where Mitchell, I think the ball was down around the 12-yard line, and then Prochet had the other one that was down deeper, I think inside the 5. But Mitchell, potentially, hypothetically, if there is if they decide they want to move on from Duvernay and save that money, and he can handle return duties, he could be one of the 46 to dress every week.
Okay, so it's an interesting thing because Duvernay really impacts your running back room if you're talking about that. And but I'll tell you, my own personal viewpoint is I really love the Ravens 4-speed guys. I think that if you ever had an offensive coordinator who could really make use of this, I mean, there was some use of it during the Roman era because you needed a speed guy at a sidecar to help drive your offense for Lamar and spread the field for him to make plays. But I think that Monken is probably in a better position to come up with route schemes that free up space in the middle of the field and make those speed guys incredibly dangerous. And the other thing I'd like is for Flowers not to be the gadget guy. I think when you don't have him as the field stretching guy, you're really losing out on an opportunity to take a safety out of the play.
Sure. Not to mention injury risk on some of those gadget plays. I mean, if you have other players that can do it, and Flowers is your only one with that really burner downfield skill set, you want to preserve that. So, I'm bullish on Mitchell. I liked him pre-draft. I liked him post-draft. And I think he's a good player. He's a keeper. I think he's a keeper. That electricity, that juice he brings, and the agility as well to that's not available on the street.
Yeah, kind of shocking to me that he wasn't drafted given who he was. I mean, he had, he has a lot of elements you'd like. And I guess what it really comes down to is there's no team out there who really trusts him as a pass blocker very much. And it takes away his possibility of being on the field on third down from, at least in the eyes of a number of teams, probably. And that obviously that is a significant factor that Hill gives you a lot more of that in terms of the ability to do a little bit of pass blocking and some receiving things on third down. My problem with Hill is I don't think he's exactly on that efficient frontier either of a good enough receiver to go with a good enough pass blocker. I think you want somebody who gives you a good balance of both of those things, or you completely sacrifice one for a lot of the other. And I don't think Hill is on that efficient frontier.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. You still like to see more out of him as a receiver. So I don't know. I'm still holding out hope on Hill, but on to Gordon. He's an old back. He doesn't have a lot of juice. He gets what's blocked for him. He's a reliable guy. He's like the Mike Davis of this year. I didn't see a need for him when they got him, and by all indications, they don't have a need for him at this point. So, fortunately, I don't think there was any guaranteed money in that contract, or if anything, it was very minimal.
Yeah, I agree. I don't remember to be fact, but if he's anything but a vet minimum deal, I would actually be quite surprised.
I think it was, if I recall, Dan said maybe it was 100,000, 200,000 more than the vet min. That's all.
Nope, zip. At least as far as they have on OTC. So he's a $1.165 million cap savings versus the if they cut him. So it's
even better.
Yeah, not unexpected.
So is there a chance that Harbaugh or somebody says, but we want that veteran stability, and they do opt for Gordon?
I kind of think the answer is no, because Gordon's history of fumbling is one that Harbaugh abhors. Like a fumble in the preseason, I think would seal.
Film Study is brought to you by Factor. With the busy fall season just around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for those jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Then get back to crushing your goals. Refresh your healthy habits without missing a beat. And with Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in all of our meals. This August, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use code Ravens50 to get that 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off.
the deal. So that would that would be it. But if you look forward and say when the first fumble occurs, is it going to be cut anyway? The chance is not zero. I mean, if particularly if the Ravens have Keaton Mitchell on the practice squad at that point, they may just say, you know what, this was a bad idea. They do have some things I guess they could do with a player like Gordon if they want to re-sign him prior to week 2. If there's no interest in him. So, I mean, they have some things, some flexibility, and that could be Keaton Mitchell's way onto the roster is that not exactly that, but that he's one of the 54 through 57 players, which means any play from him is deferred until week 4. With the injury he's got now, we don't know how serious it is yet, but it might be a case of something that would potentially keep him out 4 weeks, which I believe doesn't keep him out of practice more than 1 week. But I might be wrong about that.
I'm not sure the shoulder. Yeah, hopefully it wasn't serious, but sometimes those little stingers work out in your favor if you are able to stash somebody. I just look at Gordon. He was released in the middle of the year last year and spent the playoffs on the Kansas City's practice squad. So why would he not be able to stick on your practice squad now?
Right. You're saying, well, why would anybody else take him? And I agree. Yeah. Everybody's had a chance at him. He's working for the vet minimum already with no guarantees. Why is there a need? And the only answer to that question is that the replacement level is a moving target. As it declines and somebody else has a running back need, then Melvin Gordon becomes a viable option, as do every other practice squad running back out there.
Sure.
All right. So let's see. I want to go back to the deployment order because there were some things at other groups. So the tight end situation, Vokalek has gotten, first of all, a ton of targets in camp, an absolute ton. He gets a lot of the third team reps. There seems to be a lot of a safety blanket nature to him because he's so big. Also, a lot of the defensive highlights have come on him being targeted. Some because they come from those lesser quarterbacks, but also some because he's running routes over the middle where if the ball gets tipped or if it's a little off target, it can become an interception by that means, or even somebody can just hit him to dislodge the football. But no denying he had a hell of a game on Saturday night. Is there a possibility of a fourth tight end on this team?
I don't think they have room for 4 tight ends. I think there is a fourth tight end, and his name is Patrick Ricard, essentially. So I think that's the battle right there. Can Vokalek push Ricard off the team? Or Kolar, but I don't know. I think Kolar's third in the pecking order, Ricard's fourth, and Vokalek is fifth. I would say Ricard essentially lined up as an inline tight end on most of the plays that I logged in this game. So that's one of those, can you save some cap money without losing too much blocking? Can you 80-20 in essentially with Vokalek?
Right. So and that's a possibility. That certainly would give you a receiving option. Ricard really showed he had a great blocking game this week. So it's he's got that he's back look about him in terms of what's going on. If you get 25 spaces for the offense, and typically this is the way it always goes, is it's 25, 25, and 3 on your 53 with 3 specialists, of course, then you probably would define it as 2 quarterbacks, 4 running backs, plus Ricard, plus 3 tight ends, plus, and it's Ricard or Vokalek, you're saying 9 offensive linemen and 6 wide receivers?
Yes, that's my breakdown. Yep, I just put one out on Baltimore Beatdown yesterday.
Okay. All right, very good. So, and you don't see a 10 offensive lineman situation, even though the Ravens do seem to have additional depth there, that it would be painful to lose.
I think the 10th offensive lineman is the 54th man. That's the hardest. That's the hardest final spot for me to peg right now between Mustipher and Cleveland. And I would like to carry 10, but when you have 4 running backs, you can't really do it. So unless you want to devote more numbers, but I think they need numbers on defense right now, strength and numbers in the secondary.
Yeah, that's certainly where a lot of their special teams unit comes from is the secondary and linebacker room, and much less so on this team from the offense, with the offensive receivers being guys who you don't want out there on special teams. Neither of the free agent wide receivers, I don't think, are going to play special teams. I guess they might. I don't see them having Aguilar cover kicks. I just don't see that. And then Bateman and Zay Flowers, obviously, you're not going to use on special teams at all. And that's Duvernay, and he's only a return man. He's not a coverage guy of any sort. So that doesn't give you that does not make any contributions to your kick coverage unit until you get to Wallace.
Wallace, right.
And he's the sixth guy. Don't know if he gets taken.
I'd be skeptical. I mean, third-year guy has less than 10 career catches, and he went in the fourth round, so he wasn't highly coveted. A lot of these other teams they just take so many receivers in the draft that they all already have 6. Some teams have 7 wide receivers they like already.
Huh.
So
actually, I kind of forgotten that what you just said is Wallace is a third-year guy, not a fourth-year guy. I thought he was a 4 this year, but he has a little bit of sand in the hourglass still that you don't want to give up on, and certainly has had a good preseason.
Yeah, just on the gunners and jammers between Hill and Wallace, and I guess Seymour. Those are probably your main 3 as far as filling that role.
Yeah, they've certainly got other people who can jam, because that's what press corners are used to doing. But in terms of gunners, they want. I agree. It's Wallace and Hill are the 2 guys on the team, and then I don't really know who it is after that. It's probably maybe it's a Worley or somebody like that who could be a gunner. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it'll be an interesting set of roster decisions when it comes down to that. And then I guess we've hit on the wide receiver group. There's a number of guys that are backups in the wide receiver room. We're going to talk about each of those a little bit, and we can get to maybe where they fit on the practice squad when we get into the second half of the show here in terms of what's going on with that. Is there anything that worries you about as shorthanded as they seem to play on the offensive line in these preseason games, the way this has gone? And specifically, I'm talking about in terms of what they're asking some of their potential backups to do by only having, I think it was 27 snaps among the bottom 4 guys on the offensive line in the whole game. Now, they didn't play a lot of snaps total in this game.
Right. I was a little surprised Mustipher didn't give way to Thomas was the third string center until that point. I do like having Falele and Cleveland just getting as many reps as possible. I think that gives you the best view opportunity to see what they have. How well does Falele fare at left tackle, Cleveland at right tackle? I don't necessarily see it as an issue not giving, Manning and some of the other, really third string guys too much of a look at this point. And that also, again, the less you show, the more likely they are to stick around in your P squad.
Yeah, well, there you go. And we are going to see a lot of those players in the third preseason game, I presume, because I think John Simpson will not play in this third preseason game would be my guess. I think we'll see a fair amount of Salah still, and we'll see a fair amount of Faalele, Cleveland, probably more Manning, and then players like Tykeem Doss and Sharp and others that have not played too much so far.
Mm-hmm. It's a pretty good group with a lot of versatility. I think, you have your 2 dedicated centers, and then pretty much everybody else can play 2, 3, 4 different positions.
Maybe we move on to another topic here, and this is an interesting one that we just kind of have touched on a little bit, but we've been through 2 preseason games now. What have we really seen of the quote unquote Monken offense to date? And I could pick out and say, well, they played a lot of 11 personnel instead of 21, and they haven't played a lot of 13. Maybe have they played any? Maybe a little bit, but not. Basically, they haven't. That's not what they've been doing. But by going to 11, it's pretty much the only thing I can see that they've really Monkenized. Most of the other stuff, whatever that might be, we're not going to see till the opening day, and we haven't seen the players to do it.
I don't know if we won't see it till week 2. I mean, I don't think they're going to open up the hood for Houston. They're saving some things for Cincinnati. I guarantee it. Yeah. I agree with the that was my note. Lighter personnel
okay.
to on the outline here. That has been the big difference, and some maybe it's due to Likely's injury to some extent, but I think they do want to. It is a change. It's going to be a more voluminous passing offense and a more spread offense, and they want to, give everybody more experience doing those kind of things.
Any concerns that you have over the relationship between Lamar and Monken? Go ahead, go first, because there's a concern I have that's fairly direct here.
Between Lamar and Monken?
Yeah. So we're hearing everything.
I'm not sure if. Yeah,
we're hearing everything is rosy right now.
Nothing comes to mind. I'm interested to pick your brain.
Okay, so whenever I hear that, I was like, we're working great together. There's plays coming up. Do you remember the movie Boogie Nights? That's not before your time, right?
Nah, I haven't seen it in a long time now.
Okay. Anyway, there's a scene where Mark Wahlberg and Burt Reynolds are getting interviewed together, and Burt Reynolds is kind of the sleazy director of porn, and Mark Wahlberg is the big new porn star. And he says, and Mark Wahlberg says, yeah, he lets me block my own sex scenes. And immediately Burt Reynolds goes, no, I don't let you block your own sex scenes.
Right.
And it was a funny kind of thing. It is, and that's what I hear Lamar talking about plays. Now, it should be a collaborative effort. They should be able to get together and say, let's go after the safety. Let's do this. Let's see if we can move him out of here, create space here. You see Brady and Belichick go down and work together a game plan. They're putting together concepts on how they will, ready to play. And then I'm sure that they go back to the offensive coordinator and Belichick, and they craft that into an actual offense. No problem. If that's how he's submitting plays, that's great. But that's very positive in that regard. But it's not quite the same thing. The other thing about the wristbands and then not learning the offense because you're parroting the wristbands and the terminology from that instead of really trying to learn what each of these concept means so that you visualize it when you hear it. That's a very significant difference philosophically between the two. And I've got to believe that as offensive execution breaks down, that will become more of a point of friction, that Monken will be more likely to say, look, we got to take this armband away. You got to learn this offense better, Lamar. And Lamar's going to say, you need to change the offense in the way I've asked you to so that this becomes. And also, I don't want something so structured, which is the natural thing, that you take away all my decision-making on the field. And I'm not even talking about at the line of scrimmage. I'm talking about during the play. Don't give me read 1, read 2, read 3. When my off-schedule routine is read 1, can I run? Read 2, can I run? Extend the play, Mark Andrews.
Yeah.
So he's got a schedule already that he follows on. And if you take that away from him, you take away what's greatest about Lamar Jackson is his off-schedule playmaking.
Yeah, his improvisational ability is what separates him. I think it's a legitimate concern. We've heard of Aaron Rodgers and some of these other really high-profile quarterbacks that butt heads with their coordinators at times. I don't think Lamar's that kind of guy, but he is now giving some input into plays and newly paid and officially the franchise figurehead at this point. But I do think Monken has been around long enough, learns how to massage some things, and I did think the wristband item was an interesting note, and I think he probably has a pretty good plan of how to assimilate the working relationship reasonably well.
Well, that's really the key, and that is an area where Monken and not Lamar needs to adapt. Lamar will demonstrate by sign what he feels about the offensive coordinator if necessary. And that's been true of other the quarterbacks, not Lamar only, but we go back to Joe Flacco. He had troubles with Cam Cameron, and you heard about him. You hear about him, using Cam's name as almost a pejorative to say, yes, Cam, kind of thing. It's like, hello, Newman, kind of thing. You don't want to. It's probably not quite the correct use of the term, but it's not the kind of relationship you want to even expressed in name in that way. And the fact that Flacco had a bunch of offensive coordinators, one per year for that whole long streak, it ain't all on the offensive coordinators.
Oh yeah, no question about it.
Yeah,
but I do think Monken, coming from the college ranks, probably has a pretty good feel for the modern player, which I do think is some different than 10, 15 years ago. And I like the way he carries himself, and I think the team likes the way. Just if you hear the players, not just Lamar, but speaking about him and the way they respond to him, I think that hopefully is going to be a very positive relationship there.
Yeah, and I hope so too. And we are certainly in a honeymoon period. Yeah, he's a box coach, so he's the same as Roman in that way. He's not an on-field offensive coordinator. That might be more important for managing space, by the way, is to be a box coach. So I do like that about him, and we'll see how this works out. And by the way, let me be clear about this. I'm not saying the relationship is broken. I'm saying I see red flags that could break the relationship in the future. But right now, everybody's happy, and winning and scoring fixes everything.
Absolutely right about that. I'll make one more point before we move on. I think this may be one of the best positional coaching staffs in team history on this team right now, that they have a lot of players that are, coaches, a lot of them were former players, that are not only relatable to the younger generation, but also bring a very strong pedigree of, Dr. Rush and Denard Wilson and up and down the line, Anthony Weaver. I mean, they did a really nice job. I think this is one of their best coaching staffs they've ever had.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Anthony Weaver, if he's not a head coach in this league very soon, I would be surprised. He is, he's, I just want to tell this story because he's unbelievably relatable in this specific way. First of all, the guy is he's about 45 years old now. He's in that range. He was a draft pick in 2002. So that gives you an idea. So right around 45. Okay.
Yep.
So he gets out there, and first of all, he's still built like he could jump right onto the field today. I mean, the guy's enormous up top, no sag, not a big gut or anything. I mean, he's muscular as hell. And he gets out there and lets the defensive linemen practice their rip moves against him. And so he literally puts his arms right up on the defensive line. It's like, give me your best rip move kind of thing. And they go at him. And when he started doing that earlier in camp, he wasn't even using those long arm pads that they have for the coaches to do that kind of thing. He just do it to my arms. And that's a you're going to take a bruising from that kind of thing if you know what will happen. They may even be letting up on him a little bit because they don't want to beat him up, but that'd be the last thing that he'd want out there. Then he started using these longer arm pads, which seemed to make a lot of sense to me, but I still like the fact that he's right in there with the players, saying, look, hey, give it to me kind of thing. And how he carries himself at the podium, the way he answers questions, the way he thinks about things. The guy's very bright. And he is obviously a very relatable leader of men as well.
Absolutely. So hopefully some of those assistant coaches could help smooth over any differences between, the organization with the OC down to the quarterback and those sort of things.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That you hopefully have a better bridge of communication between a Harbaugh who say might be less relatable to the players, potentially given his age. In particular, to with a set of position coaches say, look, this is what he wants from you. This is all you have to do to satisfy that kind of thing. Yeah, I like that idea. It's over the years, some of the things have been reported about Harbaugh's behavior within the castle that have been just a little bit weird or shows kind of a short fuse he has. I'm going to tell one story that I have on particular on this. I went to a Sweetholder event, and this was back in about 2009, I believe was the year, because after Harbaugh's first year with the team had been very successful, but Kevin Byrne is up there moderating a discussion where Harbaugh and Newsome are answering questions for Sweetholders who get this as a perk with buying a suite for the year. I don't own a suite. I just happen to work for a company that owns a suite. I got 2 of the tickets that year, so that was fantastic. It was great to go to that event. They Harbaugh answered questions, and Ozzie answered some questions, and Kevin Byrne goes, it's interesting to hear these 2 answers because I'll tell you, I sit in the office across from blah, 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 and I see Harbaugh run into Ozzie's offense from time to time and say, we got to get rid of blah, blah, blah. And I see Ozzie just sit back there, listen, kind of absorb the conversation, and then say, we paid him $12 million or whatever the thing might be. That's the overriding consideration. And then Harbaugh would go, yeah, I know. And leave the office. And Byrne told that story effectively on him. He's tattling to the Sweetholder base on this occurring. But my guess is Harbaugh too has tempered over the years. He's very good about answering questions generally if you stay away from injuries at the podium. But I've gotten his short fuse one time at one of those sweet holder events too. I'll tell that story another time. But anyway, this is
he's a tough love kind of coach.
Yeah.
But he's been with this kind of tenure. I mean, he's earned it. Oh. Yeah.
All right, outstanding. I did want to talk about forcing tackles and missing in space, and we saw that obviously from Flowers in this game. We'll get into Flowers on the second part of the show when we're talking about the individual players and going through those to some degree. But I am really liking what I'm seeing from receivers in particular, but also running backs occasionally, breaking tackles in space, forcing missed tackles in space by being just a little too fast for the opponent.
Oh, yeah. Nice job changing angles, cutting. I think you're going to have more yak this season for two reasons. Number one, because you have the receivers to spread the field. Mm-hmm. For the other players in the middle of the field to have more space to operate when they receive the ball. And secondly, because those receivers, the same guys, once they get the ball, they'll create yak on their own. So I think it's a twofold solution there.
I think something is wrapped up into your second one that deserves maybe even more attention is I really expect Lamar to deliver fewer contested targets this year. And so obviously there are a lot of contested Andrews targets the last several years. If Monken can, he doesn't have to get him all the way in 1 year, but if he can move him towards a scheme where he has ways to read the field like an easy eye puzzle, that he can see it with a wide angle lens, as I call it, and see more than one target as a potential on third down. I think that's on an extended play. Then I think that will really help reduce the number of these contested targets, because that's just been a huge problem for the Ravens in terms of cutting down yards per target for several of their primary receivers.
Absolutely. And I think just spreading the defense, threatening the defense is the perfect solution for that.
All right, outstanding. Always a great conversation with you, Voss. We're going to come back and talk about individual players, MVPs, and some final thoughts on the game in part 2. But tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
I am at Vasilis Beatdown on Twitter, VASILIS Beatdown. I'm the co-managing editor at Baltimore Beatdown, and I also have a podcast called The Ravens Way every Thursday night at 9:00.
All right, fantastic. And we will come back in part 2 and talk to you more. Other folks out there, if you'd like to do a film study short, hit me up on Twitter. I'm always interested in any kind of new idea, any kind of new thought experiment. You have listened to this show, you probably understand how I like to chew up a theoretical discussion topic. So if you've got that, that's fantastic. If you want to do something on franchise building, that's great. If you have a new statistic, that's fantastic. If you want to talk about a player or trade the Ravens should make, love to hear that as well. Anyway, DM me. I'll get right back to you quickly, and we'll discuss the possibility of a show. Voss, thanks for coming on again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.